Hallo iedereen, hello everybody, and welcome to this online live teaching moment about the background of feedback. Well, occasionally I do such live teaching moments, and I do them because I think that knowledge is not a differentiator anymore. As a consultancy or coaching company like I am with the Happiness Factory, it's not about knowledge anymore. That knowledge is everywhere. It's on the internet, it's in books. So if I can learn it, you can learn it too, you can find it too. It's much more about the implementation, about the practical things of it. So that is why from time to time I organize such online live teaching moments so that I can give away all the knowledge that I have and that you can benefit from it, and then that we can really zoom in on the practical details of it. Now, the subjects that I focus on with these online teaching moments are topics that I also see that some of my clients are wrestling with. And if in different conversations the same topic occurs multiple times, then that's for me a signal or a moment where I say hey, that's something where I want to do something with. I'm going to create a live teaching moment around it. And today that was the fact with the background of feedback. Now, what it all is, we will dive in deeper just in a moment, but I will also introduce myself, because if you are now watching this or in a replay afterwards, then perhaps you came to this video because you are interested in the topic, but you don't know who I am. Well, to do that, I'm going to switch here to presentation mode, and then I can follow it. So, okay, let's see who I am, or let's introduce myself. Well, I am Dennis Fredericks. I am the dad of 4 very beautiful and adorable kids. I love to run. Occasionally I do some rock climbing, and I'm educated as an engineer, but I was always an engineer with a very strong people focus. And that's important because throughout the presentation we will come back to it. And that people focus, I also brought that into practice and enlarged it. And in 2006, I got a degree of master coach. Now, combining that all together made that in 2011, I took the step to found my own company, the Happiness Factory. And within the Happiness Factory, I am working as a coach. Now, a coach, that's a very big word. It's everything and nothing. You have personal coaches, you have life coaches, you have business coaches, you have swimming coaches, you have personal athletic coaches. I think for every word in the alphabet, there's probably a coach for that. Well, and that's the reason why I not call myself a coach, but why I love to call myself a business booster. Now you can think from what does a business booster do? Well, to be clear about that, I work with ambitious leaders who want to reach more in an easier way. Now that's one very easy sentence with a lot of information in it. So let me go over it. First of all, there's the part of being an ambitious leader. What does that mean? Well, first of all, of course, you have ambitions. You have ambitions. And that means that you know where you are and that you know where you want to go to. That's an ambition. You want to strive for something. You want to get something. And if you do that as a leader, if you really take actions on it, then you are a leader. Then you make it happen. And then you are a leader in your field. So leader doesn't necessarily mean that you also have a title as a leader. There's that beautiful quote that says you don't need a title to be a leader. No, indeed, a leader is the one who is taking responsibility and who is making it happen. And what do you make it happen? Well, that ambition, of course. You strive for that ambition. You strive to reach something. And then the second part, reach more in an easier way. That's also very important, and let's zoom into some keywords about that. Well, then I focus mainly on your own behavior, because I strongly believe that every leader has the team or organization that he or she deserved based on his or her behaviors. And that is, so if you have an ambition and you want to strive for something and you want to go for something, then of course your behaviors should be in line with that, because otherwise you are just doing something but perhaps not the right things. And then, like I already said, I'm an engineer from background, so I focus much more on, let's call it, the harder approach of coaching or the harder approach of organizations. So we're going to zoom in on the structures, the processes, the hierarchy, the culture, the people, and then always translate it back to your own behaviors and translate it back to see how you influence those elements so that you can reach more in an easier way to eventually get your ambition a reality. So that is what I do. And today we're going to talk about feedback. Now, why are we going to talk about feedback? Well, first of all, feedback is an essential part if you want to grow or develop on a personal level or on an organizational level. That doesn't matter. Why it really is an essential part, we will come back to that throughout the presentation or throughout the live teaching moment right now. But for now, just believe me, it is an essential part, and I will clarify it later on. But although it is an essential part, and although many people already know that and already know a lot about feedback, because in almost every leadership course there's a topic feedback which talks about how to give feedback and how to receive feedback, and where you zoom in on the feedback tools, etc., etc. Still, in many of the conversations I have with my clients, I see them struggle with that topic of feedback. They are still saying to me well, it's a hard thing to do. It's not as easy as it looks. And for me, that means that it is time to approach it a little bit different. Because if you don't know the basics of it, if you don't know the real background of it, of what feedback is and how you can use it, then it will always be difficult to use it. And that's the thing that I hope that you will get out of this session today. That you really understand what feedback is all about and that you understand the background of it. So it's time to go back to the basics of it. And if you understand that, then it becomes much more easy to apply it. And because it's a live teaching moment here, you have the advantage of a live Q&A. So if throughout the presentation you have any questions or any remarks, just leave them as a comment below the video stream. I will sometimes have a look at it and then we can immediately answer it. Also, at the end of the presentation, there's a small moment of time reserved especially for those Q&As, so then we can go into it directly. Okay, so that is what I hope you will get out of this session. And then another question is, why am I authorized to talk about feedback? Well, like I mentioned in the beginning with my small introduction about myself, I am educated as an engineer with a specialization in automation. And I have also the degree in the education of master coach. So I combine those two elements. And why is it important? Well, if we look at feedback, the origin of feedback, the real basis of feedback, lays within an engineering field. It goes back to the field of process control. And that's automation, of course. So I'm totally into that. And why are we going back to that process control? And how will that be related to ambitious leadership? Because process control and leadership is a bit different. Well, yes, indeed, it is different. But if we really look at the core of the feedback, then that core stays the same. So whether we are talking about process control, where feedback is really a standard, where it is absolutely integrated, and where it is not that standard or still difficult in more human processes and in organizations, well, the core of that feedback is actually the same. So I think I'm in a good position, because I've got those two elements, I'm in a good position to talk you through this all. But don't worry, you don't have to be an engineer to follow me, and we will not go really too hard and too deep into that engineering field. I will just experiment, I will show it to you, because I can tell you a lot, but if you can see it with your own eyes, then of course it's much stronger. To do that experiment, I'm going to switch back here to the full camera mode. Voila, here I am. And now I'm going to give you an example of process control, and more important, I'm going to give you an example of feedback. Watch. First of all, I'm thirsty. That's the beginning of everything. And I have things here with me to solve that problem. I have a glass. And I have a bottle of water. Now, what do I do if I'm thirsty? Well, I take my bottle of water, I turn off the cap, I take the glass, and I pour in some water. Voila, it's done. Now I have a glass of water and I can take a sip of it. That was the example, that was the experiment. Now, perhaps you're now a bit disappointed that that was everything and that there was not such a big chemical boom or something. But let's analyze it a bit more deeper, because the thing you just witnessed is very important and there is a lot of information in it. First of all, it starts with an input, the fact that I'm thirsty. And that input that makes that I am going to do something. It activates me, it activates a system. In this case, it activated my muscles to take the bottle of water, to take the glass, and to take a sip. That's the input. Then there is that transformation of it. I have that feeling of thirst, so I do things with it. And then there's the output, the glass of water, I drink from it, and my thirst problem is solved. So that is actually already a process. And you can have such processes everywhere and in everything you do. Now, there's also feedback. You just witnessed feedback into this process. And very important feedback. Because without a feedback, I would probably not pour the water correctly in the glass, or perhaps I would pour too much water in the glass or too long or something. So things could go wrong without that feedback. And which was the feedback right now, right here? Well, very easy. It was a visual feedback. I was looking at the glass while tilting the bottle and while water was streaming in the glass, and I was seeing how much water was in the glass. I could easily follow it with my eyes. Now, to indicate the importance of feedback, I can do the same thing again, but now with a blindfold on. So I'm going to take off my glasses here, and I'm going to blindfold myself, and I'm going to try to do it again. Okay, I'm blindfolded now. First of all, I have to find the bottle of water again. This is already a hard one. I put it somewhere here. Yeah, okay, I've got it. Then to find my glass. It was somewhere here. Okay, I've got it. Then if I have to do it again, then I need to take off the cap. Now I'm not going to do that because now that I'm blindfolded, there's the mic here, there's a bit of electronics around me here. It's a bit too dangerous to spill with water. But if I would do it and take off the cap, then I could just pour in the water. Now probably if I do it like this, I don't know where the glass is, here it is, it would be completely wrong, it would be completely onto the table here. So that's already an example of how important that feedback is. I cannot see it, I do things wrong. Now, if I would try this and I would really concentrate on this, then perhaps I could do it correctly. Because of course I still can feel it a bit. I can with my finger I can help a little bit so that the bottle is correctly above the glass, and so on and so on. And then while tilting the bottle, I can still hear how the water is flowing into the glass, and then, like you know, the sound changes a bit when there is more water into the glass. So if I upgrade this experiment and if I try it to make it harder for me or to eliminate even more feedback out of the process here, I don't only have to blindfold myself, I also have to take away the auditive help. So once again, now I'm taking the bottle. It was much easier. I know it was very nearby. The glass, the same thing. I could do it all over again. And now when I was really doing it, then I could not even hear whether the water was streaming into the glass or not. So it was again much harder to do so, and the chances on errors were probably much higher. Now I'm going to take this all off because it's a bit strange to deliver a webinar where you cannot see and cannot hear what is happening here. So I'm going to put on my glasses again. Okay. So that's the example. If I take away the feedback out of the system, out of the process, then the chances on errors become much higher. Even then, when I would do it like that, without being able to view it, without being able to hear it, I could still manage it. Because I can still feel it. I can still feel whether I'm having the bottle. I can still feel whether I'm having the glass in my hands. And I can still feel more or less if I am putting water in the glass. And I can also feel, for example, if I put a finger in the glass, where the water level is somewhere. So to take away the last form of feedback that is automatically integrated into this very easy process would be to do it without a feeling, without a sense, without a touch. I could do that, for example, if I try to pour in some water in the glass, not by doing it by myself, but for example with a robot arm or something, and then control that robot arm from another room, so that I cannot see what I'm doing, that I cannot hear what I'm doing, and that I cannot feel what I'm doing. Then things would become very, very hard, and then I would definitely need an external source of feedback. For example, someone who is sitting here at the table and who is viewing and then giving me instructions so I can manipulate the robot arm in the correct way. That somebody says from, okay, a bit higher, a bit slower, a bit further, now tilt it a little bit more, okay, stop with tilting. If I would receive that feedback with another person who can view it and can feel it and so on, then probably it would go in a good way. So it's a very easy experiment, but with a lot of important information in it. And what are the things that we can learn from it? Then I'm going to switch back here to presentation mode. Here we are. Okay, here we are. So what did we learn from this experiment? First of all, it's all about the system. There's an input, there's an output, there's a system or a process in between that transfers the input into an output. And then there's that feedback loop that connects the output back to the input. And that feedback loop is actually the only information that you have to notify you or to control or to see whether the output is in line with the input. In this case, the input was I'm thirsty. The output is a glass of water that I can drink. And the transformation that happened in between were all the actions and manipulations I had to make. And the feedback there was the visual feedback or the auditive feedback or perhaps even the sensing feedback. And that connects it together. Imagine that the feedback would not be there and that I would completely blindfolded with my hearing protection on. I would try to pour in some water in the glass. I cannot see it, I cannot feel it, I cannot hear it. I will not drink it, and I will give the glass to someone else, and that someone else will never tell me whether there is water in it or not. Then I have absolutely no clue of what happened or what I did, of if the transformation between input and output was successful or not. And that's the importance of feedback. It notifies you about the result, and it sees or it informs you whether that output is in line with the desired input. And if it's not the case, then you can adjust it, of course. If it is the case, then it's fantastic. And that system, or that system thinking with input, system and output and a feedback loop around it, is actually everywhere. Now I demonstrated it with a bottle of water and a glass, but it's exactly the same thing for this presentation. My input is my knowledge, is my preparation, is my experience. The output or the desired output is that you as a viewer, that you learn something from it. The feedback is the one that connects the two. And the feedback is hopefully that you give me feedback, or that I notice that you understand it, that you learn something from it, and then the output, the result, is in line with the input, the things that I'm putting in. Now, in this moment, it's quite hard because actually I'm just talking here to my webcam. So there is not much feedback right now. If I would give this presentation in front of a room where the people were sitting in front of me, then it would become much easier to have feedback, because then again I could look at the people, I could see how they reacted on the things that I was doing, and then immediately I could check whether the output, the result, was in line with the input, and if it was not the fact, then I could adjust it. At this moment it's much harder to do. There is, of course, a bit of feedback because people can type in some reactions, and I'm actually viewing if there were already reactions or not. Okay, it doesn't seem to be like that. But that could be a feedback. If people actually type in some comments or some remarks, then I get feedback whether it is accepted or whether it is viewed or whether you understand it or not. So this system thinking of input, transformation, output, and then closing the loop with a feedback, that is actually essential. And you can, if you have that in your mind, you can see those systems everywhere. It is in everything that happens. That's the first lesson that we learned out of the experiment. Now, a second lesson that we can distillate out of the experiment is the fact that there are different forms of feedback. I already mentioned it for a few times. There was the visual feedback, the auditive feedback, the sensing feedback. So there is a lot of different sorts of feedback. And some of those feedbacks are automatically present. If I'm playing here with the bottle and the glass, I have eyes, so I see it. That visual feedback is automatically present. If I'm delivering this presentation in front of a group of people, that visual feedback is automatically present. I see those people, I see their reaction. Now, some forms of feedback are not directly present, because I can have a look at those people, I can see how they react, but I can never feel or see what they think. I can never look into their heads, I can never look into their body to see what the real effect is of the things that I'm saying. If I want to have that reaction, then there needs to be an extra sort of feedback. Feedback where people really tell me what they think or what they feel about the presentation. Or people say it by themselves, and then the feedback loop is also a bit coming automatically. Or I have to ask for it, and then I am creating that feedback loop. I am actually closing the loop because I know it's important to really align the desired output or the output with the desired output with the input. So there are different forms of feedback. Some of them are just present, others are not present, and then you have to create it. You have to ask for it. There's also a third lesson that we can learn out of this simple experiment, and that is the fact that the provided feedback should be aligned with the process and with the receiver. If, for example, I am doing that exercise again with the bottle of water and the glass, and I'm standing in the different rooms, so I'm controlling a robot arm to do it for me, and people have to react on it and to yell when the glass is full. Well, when they wait until the water is really at the top of the glass and then they yell, then I still have to hear it, then I have to push a button to stop the robot of pouring water into the glass. It takes some time before it actually happens. So in that case, the feedback that is given is not really aligned with the process, because by the time that then the robot stops and tilts the bottle back, because just of the slowness of the process of somebody watching it and then yelling and then my interpretation and then I have to push a button and so on and so on. Well, because of that slowness, that sort of feedback is not the good feedback for that system. Another example. Earlier this week, I was having a conversation with somebody about something completely different. It was more about religion and that sort of things. And the person was telling me that he was going to a therapist, and within that religious context, the therapist was saying him from, you have to surrender yourself to the will of God. That guy went completely crazy about it. Why? Because he didn't know how to do it. How do you surrender yourself to the will of God? How do you surrender yourself to the universe? What do you have to do for that? So in that case, the feedback was not aligned with the receiver, because the receiver didn't know what to do with it. And I can think about different examples of that type, where, for example, somebody is giving a presentation in a company or something, and afterwards somebody gives him feedback about that presentation, and he's saying from, well, perhaps you have to do it like this or like that, and the other person has no clue of an idea what he's talking about. In that case, then there is feedback in the system, but the feedback is not the right feedback because the person doesn't understand it. It can happen. So, again, a very important lesson: to close that loop between output and input. If that input and output is separated, if that are different persons, then of course they need to be aligned and they need to talk about the same things. Another example, very easy one to understand it. If I'm talking to my son, for example, he did something and the thing he did was not in line with the desired input, for example, with the values that I have or something, then I have to tell him about it. I have to give him feedback. And if, for example, I would do it in English, my son does not yet speak English, he would not understand it. A very easy example of how feedback can be completely not in line with the receiver of the feedback. Okay, and then there's the fourth lesson that we got out of this experiment, and that is that without feedback, you are just doing something. remember that at a certain moment when I was blindfolded, I told you normally I have to take off the cap of the bottle before I pour in the water, but I'm not going to do it because it's too dangerous to do it right now, because if I pour incorrectly and the water doesn't go into the glass but falls on the microphone, for example, here, or on the electronics that are in front of me, then I have some fireworks here, and that's not what I want. So without that feedback, took away that feedback of the visual feedback, so I could not see it, and then the risk level increases. Things could go terribly wrong without feedback in your system, because then there's absolutely no connection anymore between the input and the output. You are putting in something, probably with all the best intentions that you have, and you're doing it in the best possible way that you can do it. But if you reach the result with that or not, you have no clue of an idea, because there's absolutely no link between output and input. So it's all about that very easy drawing that you see on your screen. There's input, there's a system, there's an output, and those two, output and input, are connected through feedback. And if that connection is not made, then the system is just separated. You're doing everything you can, but you have not a clue of an idea whether it's good or not. Again, the same example with me giving this presentation here in front of my webcam. If I'm just giving this presentation to the webcam, that webcam will never tell me whether it's good or bad, or whether I should improve something or not. So then I have absolutely no feedback loop there. There's no connection between output and input. It's completely separated. So I don't have a clue if I'm doing it good or not. The only moment when I can have a clue about it is when I search for feedback. So for example, in this case that I'm looking here at another screen to see if somebody already reacted or had a question about it, because that would give me feedback to see how it is received. Okay, now that are the very important lessons of that feedback, and feedback viewed from a perspective of process control. As I mentioned, that's the real basic of feedback. That's the real origin of feedback. And you can apply that system thinking to everything. Those systems are everywhere. Pouring into water from a bottle into a glass, giving a presentation, having a conversation with somebody, it are all those systems of input, transformation, output, and a feedback loop who is closing the system and connecting the output with the input so that you can see whether the system reaches the desired goal or not. And if you look at it with that perception or with that engineering eye, then feedback is actually a very easy thing. And then you can wonder but if it is really that easy, then why are people still struggling with it? Or why do we overcomplicate things? Well, it's very easy actually. We overcomplicate it because we are humans. And we as humans, we are emotional and empathic beings. And because of all those emotions and because of all those empathics, we cannot give feedback on a very neutral way. If in that same example with the glass and the bottle, controlled with a robot arm, for example, and me standing in another room, and somebody is here watching the process and giving me instructions from, okay, robot arm a bit higher, now tilting slower, a bit faster, bit higher, and so on and so on. That's very neutral feedback, and nobody would have a problem by doing that. Perhaps it could even become very funny if you yell the wrong instructions, or if then the person make a wrong interpretation about it, and then the robot do some strange things. So it could be very funny, but it stays very neutral. But that is about a technical process. Even when pouring in a glass of water is not that really technical, but still it's a bit of a technical process. Now, if we bring that system thinking to the human side, like for example in a presentation, and where you have to give feedback about that presentation, then suddenly it becomes not neutral anymore. There are a lot of emotions and empathic things that are playing, because if you are giving that feedback, then you're already thinking for yourself, well, the input that the person is giving, probably he did the best he could at his best possible way. And now I have to give feedback about it because I'm closing the loop, so I'm connecting the output to the input, and something went wrong in the transformation there because the output is not reached. Now I have to tell it to that person. But he really did everything he could, and it was with a good preparation and so on, and now I have to tell him. Who knows how he will react on it? That's the little voice in our head that is playing when we want to give feedback. It's about that empathic connection. We already think about the other person. We already think from how is he going to react on this. And if he's not going to react very well on it, then should I say it or not? Or perhaps I'm going to hurt him. So then it's all about emotions and empathics. I have a list of a few things here. For example, it is about fear. You are frightened to give that feedback. Or somebody does something or says something, that's also such process or system. The input is the one saying something, the output is your reaction to it, and then there's that feedback loop. If you give it back from, well, you said this, and this is the reaction, this is what it does with me internally. It could happen that somebody says something or shows a certain behavior that you become really frustrated about it. And that's the emotional or empathic reaction, then it becomes very hard for you to give that feedback in a very neutral, constructive way. Now, then you're closing that loop, but you're not actually closing that loop. You're just emotionally reacting on the feelings that are generated within yourself. So fears, frustrations, perhaps you're going to fight against it from, but it's not true what you're saying. You're giving me this feedback, but no, it's not true. I was thinking about it completely different. Or you flight away from it. You run away from it. You don't want to hear that feedback. Perhaps you're in the denial phase from, he's saying that, but no, he got it wrong. It's not like that. And there's resistance on it for yourself. Or perhaps you're in the ignorance phase where you completely ignore the feedback from, yes, I know he said it like that, but I'm not going to do anything with that. So, and that's for the receiver side, but the same elements also are at play on the one who is giving the feedback. Perhaps it's very frightful to give feedback to somebody because you know he will react in a very, very strong or wrong way on it. Perhaps you are so frustrated that you don't want to give feedback anymore. Perhaps you just fly away from it. Perhaps you are in resistance to help somebody, or you think from, I'm not going to give that feedback. Perhaps you're ignoring the little things that you say from, I saw it and I need to say it to that person. I need to deliver that feedback, but you know what? I will talk about it tomorrow or something. And then you forget about it, and then you just ignored those little things, and you didn't give him the opportunity to receive that feedback. So that is the wrong reaction. That is not a good reaction, because with those reactions you are actually not closing that system loop, or you're closing that system loop in the wrong way. So there is no link anymore between input and output. And if there is no link between input and output, then nothing will happen. Imagine, remember what I said. If there is no feedback, then you're just doing something, but you absolutely don't know what you're doing. The input is transferred into an output, but you have no clue of an idea of what that output is. In the example of my glass, I was pouring in some water, or at least I thought, because I cannot see and I cannot hear about it. I'm giving the glass away to somebody else. He's not giving me feedback. I will never know whether I poured water into the glass or just on the mic here. So feedback is essential to link that system, to close that system, and to link the output to the input side. Now, a better way to handle it, away from those fears and frustrations and fights and flights and denials, is to become a feedback star. And what does it mean to be a feedback star? Well, first and for all, the fear will always be there. If you are giving feedback to someone, it will always be a bit frightening, because you never know how he will react on it. And because especially the input side, well, probably the person did the best that he could, and he delivered the things at the best possible way. So if you are going to link the output back to the input, that's always a bit scary, because that output is always a bit of a question mark. So it can be frightening. And there's also a lot of uncertainty. You don't know exactly whether that person is aware of the fact that, for example, the output is not in line with the input. Perhaps he is, perhaps he is not. Perhaps he has different expectations around it. So the input and the output side, they are really separated from each other. There's one person who is giving the input, and there's one person who is looking at the output side. And because it are two different persons, well, it's always a bit of an uncertainty from how are we standing against each other. Are we in line? Are we not in line? Do we speak the same language? Do we recognize the same things or not? So it's normal to have a bit of a fear around it, and it's normal to be a bit uncertain around it. And if you are aware of those things, that it's normal to have it, that's already the beginning of being a feedback star. And it's plays as well for the receiver as well for the one who is giving the feedback. Because also on the receiving part, it can be very frightening. Yeah, I did something, now somebody is giving me feedback about it. And well, actually, I'm a bit afraid about that. How will it be? Again, the same thing, this example, I'm giving this presentation, I'm giving this online teaching moment. At this moment, I'm just talking to my webcam here. Yeah, well, it's a bit frightening. Perhaps the message doesn't come across, and the people who are watching this live or in a replay, or the ones who will listen to it in the podcast, well, perhaps they don't get the message at all. Well, in that case, yeah, it's a bit frightful. And it also gives me a bit of uncertainty. Well, perhaps I'm doing it right, perhaps I'm doing it wrong. I don't know, and I will only know until I get feedback. But if I get feedback and that feedback indicates that the output is not in line with the desired output or with the input that I was providing, yeah, then that also gives a lot of uncertainty, because where did it go wrong? Well, somewhere in that transformation phase, in the process, in the system, that black box in between, of course. And that gives a lot of uncertainty. But just if you want to become a feedback star, know it's there. Know that there is fear, know that there is uncertainty, and it's totally okay. And that brings us to the third step of being a feedback star. Take the risk anyway. If you want to give feedback, well, it is a bit of risky to give feedback, but give it anyway. And if you are on the receiver end, if you are going to receive feedback, it's also a bit, it will give you some uncertainty, it will give you some fears, but it's all okay, and take the risk. Do something with that feedback. Experiment. Try to implement that feedback. Try to change your approach together with the feedback you got. And that brings us to the fourth point of being a feedback star, and that is the conversation. Because if you receive feedback, it's very important to dive into it and to talk about it and to see what is it that that person exactly means. So ask for more feedback, and especially after taking the risk, if you are changing your approach, if you are changing things because of the feedback, then you need absolutely to ask for more feedback, because only then again you can control whether the new output is in line with the input, or with the desired output if that is not a fact, then you still have to take more risks and you still have to adapt your approach even further until it is in line. And that's where the conversation is very important, to really understand what that is. So if somebody gives you feedback, don't react emotionally on it, but take that risk, take it on with full hands and go for that conversation. The same thing with giving feedback. If you are giving feedback, well, that's again a system and a process. You have an idea of something you want to transfer to the other person, your feedback, of course, but you never know how that feedback is received. So then it's actually like installing a feedback loop over the feedback loop, because you are giving feedback about the process, but you also need to ask for feedback to see whether that feedback has landed with your other person, with the one who is receiving the feedback. And if you do all those things, then eventually the fifth star point, you will create an insight, a learning, a moment where the person really made a step, really grow into that element of where you are giving feedback about. And that's eventually why you are giving feedback. Remember, at the beginning of the presentation, I said feedback is essential for growth and for development, as well on a personal level, as on an organizational level, or on a team level. Well, it is all because of this. If you do something with the feedback, and feedback is closing the loop between the input and the output, well, then you are actually adjusting the output. And that is what you need as an ambitious leader, because, like we discussed in the beginning, an ambitious leader is someone who wants to strive for something, who is taking those steps and who is also radiating that and guiding or steering his organization into that direction. So, if you provide good feedback, then you are actually steering on your output, then you are adjusting your output. And by constantly adjusting that output because you are giving feedback, then you also create insights and you create learning moments. So leading and learning are very, very close related to each other because of feedback. Feedback is the bridge in between leading and learning. And that's where we have to strive for all together. For yourself as a leader, but also as a leader to your people. And if you do it like that, with that idea of the system thinking, input, system, transformation, output, and then feedback to close the loop, to close that gap between output and input, then you are absolutely on the right track. Well, that was actually everything that I wanted to give you about feedback and about the real background of feedback. Let's call it the engineering approach of feedback or the process control of feedback. And so now you are ready to go and practice with it. But remember, the devil is always in the details. It might sound very easy, like I explained it right now. And actually it is very easy, but still if you want to implement it and if you want to apply it, that's where the hard part is. And remember, totally in the beginning I said that knowledge isn't a differentiator anymore. Well, it's all about this practice. You can watch this live stream, this live online teaching moment. You can listen to it on a podcast. You can have a replay. You can replay it even 10 times. But nothing will happen. Nothing will change unless you implement it, unless you go and practice with it. And when you go and practice with it, then you can discover for yourself where really the hard part is. It's not about the big thing of giving feedback then anymore. No, then it becomes especially about, for example, that part of taking the risk of giving the feedback. That's the hard part for me. All the other stuff I know I can do, I understand it and so on, but really that taking the risk, that's the hard part. Could be that is the case for you. And then you can reflect on it to find out why is it so hard to take that risk. And then things can come up like, in the past I've taken several risks and it always went bad. So I'm very scared to take another risk. Okay, and then we can do something about that. That's just an example, of course. It can also be something completely different. It can also be, for example, that system thinking, that you say from, okay, I understand it, input, system, output, and feedback to close the loop. But it's very hard for me to see those processes or see those systems around me and to translate that system thinking into a human world. Okay, that's another very practical, precise thing. So that's the reason why you have to apply it and then narrow it down more and more and more to be very, very specific about what it is that makes it hard for you. And then you can reflect on it, why it is hard for you. And if you find it out like that, then it's probably the good moment to come back to me and to request a free clarity session. In a free clarity session, we focus on those things that matter most to you on that specific right moment. So, for example, you go out and you start to experiment with this system thinking on feedback, and you observe that it's hard to take that risk. Well, then there is a challenge for you. And that's the thing that we are going to zoom in on. Very specific, very targeted. And of course, we're going to relate that to your ambitions and your goals and your dreams. Because it could happen that if your goals and your dreams are in a certain area and you are now struggling with that one specific thing, that you can just bypass it and still get to your big ambition, dream or goal. So it's not always if there is a problem or a challenge that you need to overcome it to still reach your ambition. So that's something we have to zoom into to clarify. That's also the reason why it's called a clarity session, to clarify those things so that you know what you should do next and what your next step can be. So we will zoom in on it, we will investigate it, we will investigate on your blocking points, we will look for perhaps even hidden obstacles, and then we will summarize it all and end the session in a very powerful way with a clear action plan. Actions you can take immediately after the session on yourself. Actions you can take or do for yourself, but more on a longer term. And then also an overview of things where it would be useful for you to get support. And that support can come from me, for example, but perhaps you need support on some completely different topics, which are not my area of interest. And then, of course, we will have to find a solution for that you can find somebody else who can support you in that. So that's the reason for a clarity session, to really zoom in on those challenges that you have right now, combine them with the goals and the dreams, look for hidden obstacles, and then create some action plans around it to see what you can do immediately, longer term, and where it is useful to have support. And if we discover there that it's useful for you to have a support by me, then of course that's the beginning of a very nice and interesting program together. That all is done within 90 minutes, because it's a clarity session of 90 minutes. And we are going to clarify those things and end with those next steps that you can take for yourself. If you're interested in such a clarity session, well, then I've got good news for you. I can offer this clarity session for free for everybody who is watching this live stream right now and who is going to review it as a afterwards, the review of the live stream, the recording. That was the word I was searching for. If you watch the recording of the live stream, then I can also offer you this free clarity session. You just have to go to the website, so www.thehappinessfactory.be/booking. There you will find a button, and if you click on it, button says book appointment, then you can immediately access my online agenda and book your free clarity session in it. at the moment that is most suited for you. If you want to learn more about these clarity sessions and about how it is to work with me, then just go to the website www.thehappinessfactory.be, and in the upper right corner you will see a navigation link that says work with me. There you can find all the information about how it is to work with me. You can also find there some client stories, and totally at the bottom of that page there is that same button to go to my online agenda and book that free clarity session. If you're on the website, totally top right, there's also the contact page, and also on the contact page there is that button to go to my online agenda. So there are chances enough to not miss it and book in that free clarity session with me. Okay, well, that was actually it for today. That was everything I wanted to share with you. And here are again my contact details. So like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm Dennis from The Happiness Factory. That's also my email address, dennis@thehappinessfactory.be. My phone number is indicated here. The website is indicated here. My picture is indicated here. I have different glasses and my hair is a bit longer, but I'm still the same person and I can still provide you with the same information and same guidance. You can also find me on the social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Facebook as a person. I'm on Facebook as a company with The Happiness Factory. The same is on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as a professional. I'm on LinkedIn as a company, The Happiness Factory. I'm also on Instagram. On Instagram, you can find me more to have a glimpse on my life after being an entrepreneur. So on my personal things that I'm doing, on the different projects that I'm working on, the different places that I'm visiting. So then you can see that I'm a real person and also doing something else than only working here. Not much, but still. There's also the Ambitious Leader podcast, which is available through the website or to Apple Podcasts, which is iTunes, but for the podcast sections, they rebranded it, and now we have to talk about Apple Podcasts. So in iTunes or Apple Podcasts, you can listen to the Ambitious Leader podcast. And of course, there's also the Ambitious Leader community, which is a Facebook group and which is a bath of inspiration for all very interesting ambitious leaders who want to inspire and be inspired by each other, to support each other and to grow together. And very good or very important, you would do me a big favor to close the loop. Like I mentioned in the beginning, system thinking about feedback. So there's an input, there's a system, a transformation, there's an output, and feedback is actually linking that output back to the input. In this case, I mentioned it a few times already, I was providing you with input. You receive the output, it does something with you, you think about it. If you close the loop and if you give back the feedback to me about how this presentation was, what you got out of it, that would help me a lot, because then you are providing me with feedback. So please comment your most valuable insights, and that can help me again, and then you are closing the loop. Okay. That's it for now, and now we can have our Q&A, so a moment for questions, and to answer those questions I'm going to switch back to full camera mode here so that you can see me better to answer those questions. I'm going to have a look at the stream here to see if there are any questions. I don't think so. We'll also have a look here, if here are any questions. No. Well, then that can mean different things. Or it means that everything was extremely clear and that there were no questions left. Or it means that you are not yet a feedback star, so that you are not yet closing the loop between the output and the input. So perhaps it's a bit too fearful right now to type in something or to ask a question. Perhaps you're still in the ignorance mode where you say okay, it's nice, I heard it, but I'm not going to ask that question. Who knows? Well, I think perhaps you still have to practice with it, provide that questions, provide that feedback, and then I can answer it to you. If there are no questions right now, that's no problem at all. You can also just type them in if you see the recorded version of it. And then, of course, I can still answer all your questions afterwards. Okay, well, that is it for today. That is it for the moment right now. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it, and I hope this makes it much more easy for you to now apply that feedback thanks to the system thinking. Good luck with it, and if you have any questions, please contact me, type them in the comments, or book that clarity session so we can dive in directly into your personal questions. Thank you very much for watching, and see you later. Bye.